Hello everybody, welcome to another Smooth on YouTube live presentation. Today we're going to be making a flexible rubber mold of this ash tree and subsequently casting it in concrete. My name is Erni Doджак, I'm with the Smooth on Buddy Roads concrete team and I'm very happy to be here today. A little housekeeping to get out of the way before we start the presentation. Behind the scenes, my videographer Alex Hazard will be helping me out with the presentation. And we also have Adam Case as our moderator for the live presentation. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please do not hesitate to enter them in the chat box. We'll do our best to answer them during the live presentation today. If you're watching this presentation at a later date, check the link in the description below. It'll take you to the Smooth On or the Buddy Roads website, and you can enter a tech ticket, and we will answer your question at a later time. So again, today we are going to be making a flexible rubber mold and casting concrete in it. So let's take a look at what we're going to learn today. What we're going to be learning today is how to choose the right rubber for making a production mold for concrete. And those are some terms that we're really going to want to remember. We're looking to make a production mold, and we are casting concrete. So when we get into choosing the right rubber, that is certainly going to be some details that we want to focus on. How to properly prepare our wooden model, and we're going to talk about the porosity of the model and how to properly seal it and prepare it so it's actually ready to have a mold cast over it. Proper mold making techniques for making a urethane block mold, and that's what we're doing today, which is called a flat back or a block mold. We're going to talk about the process of that, and we will talk about when we get into the concrete casting portion, we'll talk a little bit about the differences of integral colors going into our blend, and then topical colorants, our glazes, going on our cast at the end. We're also going to learn how to mix and pour Buddy Roads GFRC blended mix. And we're going to be following the SCC, or the self-consolidating recipe. We're going to be applying some Buddy Roads glazes for some finishing touches in the end. And we're going to segue with an intro into the concrete sealer and how to apply them for this specific project. What materials will we be using today? We're going to be using Vitaflex 40, Sonite wax, Universal Mold Release, Aquacon concrete release. We're going to be using the Buddy Roads GFRC blended mix, water reducer 555, the PVA 15 and 100 fibers. We'll be pulling some Buddy Roads signature sand pigment. We're also going to be using the Buddy Roads glazes and the Buddy Roads penetrating and satin sealer. So before we get started, a little note on safety. Throughout the presentation, you'll be seeing me wear safety glasses, dust mask when needed, and protective gloves when needed. So that is a note on safety. So without further ado, let's get into this project. Again, what we're going to be doing is making a flexible rubber mold of this slice of ash tree. And this is a piece of tree that my associate cut down for me in his backyard. And what we're looking to do is actually make a flexible rubber mold and then recreate the detail from the model into concrete and make some decorative pavers for a walkway. So we want to talk about our mold a little bit. Thankfully, our model is definitely relatively flat. So our model can be placed on a piece of melamine and we can start to build a mold containment field around it. So that's going to be the theory of making a flat back or a block mold. It's nice that we have this piece of melamine and we're able to place our model right on here and start to build a mold containment field around it. Before starting any good project, you want to think about the end. What are we looking to do? If you think about the end, I want to have as many of these reproductions made in concrete, capturing the detail for a walkway, for a garden, to sell them in a statuary business. So we want to think about what our model is. And our model is a relatively dry piece of porous wood. So we're going to be getting into some notions of sealing it in a moment, and how we seal it and why we seal it and what we seal it with, and preparing the model prior to mixing and pouring our liquid rubber over top of the model. So with that being said, I mentioned some key terms there: production and concrete. So we want to think about what material we're going to be using. Within the Smooth On world, two of the most common mold making materials are going to be choosing from the silicone line or the polyurethane line. So let's take a look at why we're choosing Vitaflex today, which is a polyurethane, and not choosing a silicone. So first we'll start with the advantages of silicone. Yes, they have the best release properties of any mold making material. They have high temperature resistance and high tear strength, and they're also very elastic. And they are resistant to the acrylic polymers that we're going to be adding in our blended mix. Well, it's actually already added to our blended mix. The unfortunate disadvantages when working with silicone is going to be the cost. They're going to be just a few more dollars than a polyurethane. And the idea of this is a production casting mold, and we want to keep our costs relatively low. Another issue when working with silicone is it does require exact measurement. So you may need to use a gram scale, and we're going to be talking about a term in a minute called mix ratio. So there's some odd mix ratios with a lot of silicones. They have a high viscosity that can actually necessitate vacuum degassing to eliminate the air bubbles. And since we're adding plasticizer to this mix, we have found that a lot of silicones can actually absorb some of the plasticizers, and that actually will degrade the mold sooner than later. So we've sort of slid out why we're not using silicones. Let's take a look at the advantages and, unfortunately, some of the disadvantages and the things we need to take into account when working with polyurethane. Polyurethane, wide hardness range, and that's going to be a term we're going to be talking about in a little bit, is durometer. So there's a very high range of hardness for making a flexible rubber mold. Relatively low cost. We want to keep this in the production aspect, and we want to keep our costs down for our production. Convenient mix ratio. That's also a precursor to a term we're going to be talking about later, mix ratio. What's nice about the Vitaflex series, they are 1-to-1 mix ratio. We'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. Lower viscosity, no need to degas in a vacuum chamber when working with polyurethanes, and they also have high tear strength, and they are also abrasive resistant. The biggest disadvantage when working with polyurethane is going to be its adhesive nature and its adhesive qualities. You must apply a release agent when you're building your mold, when you're pouring your liquid rubber over your model, and you must apply a release agent or a form release when you're casting concrete. We'll talk about that when we get through the presentation. They can be very moisture sensitive, so you want to be very cognizant of the environment that you're in. You want to make sure that you put the lids back on in a timely manner when you're working with them, and that's also a key to our model. In this instance, our model is actually relatively dry, so we don't have to worry about any moisture harming the material that could cause cure inhibition in the rubber once it's cured. There is a limited shelf life, and they can be affected by oils and solvents. But with all that being said, we have decided that we're absolutely going to be using polyurethane for this project. It's going to be the best, mold making material for making a production concrete mold and then casting concrete. All right, so got that out of the way. Let's get to our mold. So we are making what's called a flat back mold. So we're going to be building a mold containment field around our model. It's on a melamine base, and what we want to do is first inspect our mold, clean it. You want to make sure that there's no debris that's going to be on the side or in the little cracks and crevices of the model. Later in the presentation, you're going to see a few different models, and I'll talk about those in a minute. So each model that you work with may require a different type of cleaning or a different type of preparation. So you always want to be aware of what your model is. Again, going back to what I was saying before, thinking about the end of the project. How do you want this project to, what's the outcome you're looking for? So really you want to start off by cleaning the model, making sure that it's free of debris. You can see, unfortunately, with this piece of tree, we had some bark on it, but the bark was starting to be removed when we were cleaning it. So we're actually going to make a mold without the bark, but then you're going to see some models later and some castings that actually have some nice bark detail on them. Okay? So we have got our model relatively clean, and now what we want to do is secure our model. And since we have this melamine base, we're actually going to be doing that. So prior to securing our model to the melamine base, we are actually going to be drilling some holes. These holes at the bottom of our melamine base are going to allow any air that could be trapped underneath our model to escape through these bubble trails. We don't want these bubbles to force their way up through the rubber onto the face of our model, which would then subsequently be in our finished mold and transferred to our castings. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a drill, and yes, my friends at Smooth On have let me use some power tools today. So this is very rare occurrence when you see Ernie with tools, but here we go. So we're going to drill a few pilot holes here. And these and just a few holes to allow for the air to escape. Now, if you'll notice, my model is actually elevated a little bit as well. This is on what's called a lazy Susan, and that's actually really good for the mold making process. It's going to give us a nice way to turn our model around. It's also going to give us some additional area for this air to escape at the bottom on the lazy Susan. We'll take a time out here for a moment. This is a lazy Susan, and I would like to say, in all honesty, I have never met a lazy Susan. Buddy Rhodes' wife's name is Susan. She is anything but lazy. She's an extremely hard worker. My good friend Jim, who right now is being a little lazy and vacationing, his wife's name is Sue. They are not lazy. They are extremely hard workers. So, moving forward in this presentation, this will be known as a lazy Ernie. So we're going to place our melamine on our lazy Ernie, and we're going to get ready to secure our model. So we want to secure our model. There's various ways you can secure it. You can secure it with super glue. You can secure it with hot melt glue. Today we're actually going to be securing it with just a screw. So we're going to go ahead and make sure that our model is relatively centered on the melamine base. This is a precursor to the mold making portion. We want area around here so that we can build our mold containment field. Typically a mold wall is anywhere from 1/2 of an inch to 3/4 of an inch. So we've got plenty of space around this melamine base. So we're just going to go ahead and flip our model over and place it down. I'm just using my fingers just to make sure that it's relatively centered, and it is relatively centered. One of the things I learned very quickly when starting at Smooth On, when you're working with melamine, drill pilot holes. I'm actually using a countersunk bit here so that we have a nice level model at the bottom. The reason I say drill these pilot holes is melamine is effectively just a particle board, and it will split if you just try to put a screw in there. I learned that the hard way when I first started here at Smooth On. Part of my job interview was to make a melamine bird, basically a birdhouse, a box. I failed miserably. Thankfully, my charm and wit got me the job. Okay, so we're just putting 2 screws in, nothing real major here. Again, you could secure it with some glue, but I think we're going to be fine with just a few screws. All right, here we go. Perfect, perfect. Relatively centered. We've got plenty of room here to build our mold containment field around here. We've got our model secured on a melamine base. We've got air holes. We've got it secured. It is resting on a lazy Ernie. Now, if you notice, it is a relatively flat mold, but it's not fully flat, and we need to discuss that and realize what we're going to do with this little gap area down here at the bottom of our model, as well as these cracks and crevices on top of the model. The liquid rubber is going to find its way into any of these little cracks, any of these little breaks at the bottom of our base. So what we're going to do is actually build a clay gasket around the bottom, and this is going to avoid any flashing that's going to come when we pour our liquid rubber. This is, I've actually just went ahead and rolled out some clay. This is a Sculptex clay. This is sulfur-free clay. The reason you're going to want to use sulfur-free clay is if you're using a clay that may have been mined near sulfur, it can and more than likely will cause cure inhibition on polyurethanes and silicones. So we're going to go ahead and just start to apply this clay at the bottom of our model here. I rolled out the clay. This clay comes in soft, medium, and hard. I went ahead and used soft today just to make sure that we get it nice and spread around our model. There are various ways that you can do this. Some people will actually use a silicone caulking. Really depends on what your mold making material is, if you want to choose that. I find the clay works very nice. It's very forgiving. You can really push it in and underneath the model when need be. One of the mold making tip here is we talked about thinking about the end and what you want your casting, your final casting to look like. I want to capture as much detail on this side of my piece of ash tree and any other tree that I'm making, any other slice of wood that I'm making. So I don't want to, cover up any of that. The liquid rubber is basically going to pull the detail off of this piece of clay. We want the natural grooves, we want the natural woodwork, the wood tone from the piece of tree. We don't want to actually make a mold of the clay. So you can come in with some of these sculpting tools and you can actually remove any excess clay. This is also a good chance if you want to make any type of beveling, and which would be easy when you get into the demolding or actually placing the paver in the, whether it's the sand or the gravel that you're going to place the paver in. So we're just going to go ahead and place this clay around our model. Again, when you're working with something like this, it is always good to have your clay rolled out. It's a lot easier than just trying to do it each piece. There's some nice little tools you can buy, these little clay extruders that you can hook up to a drill, or you can simply just roll it out. But I like to do everything by hand. And we're just going to continue to apply this clay. Again, moving it around really nicely on my Lazy Ernie, not having any issues, so that I can see the entire model. No one has to see me bending down and showing my gray hair, which I could make all sorts of comments. My friend Alex, the videographer, had talked about some CGI effects and was actually going to give me luxurious blonde hair. So I'm hoping my friends at home see that. I hope that actually made its way into production. Maybe we can just do that in the post. So again, just building this bevel, this clay gasket, if you will, around the bottom of my model. Now again, this could take a little bit of time. One of the things when you're making a mold is you want to take your time making a mold. This is a live presentation today, so for camera's sake, we're going to cooking show style it at times, you'll see. But you really want to make sure you take your time when you're making a mold before you cast in it. And this is a big tip I see a lot with concrete countertop. People that make concrete countertops, concrete furniture, it may take them, a week to make the mold perfectly, the way they want it, the way that they want it built, the way that they want it to have a demold from it, whether they want to reuse that type of mold. So it may take them up to a week to make the mold, design it, and then simply, pour concrete or spray concrete into it and be done in almost a day with the casting portion. So a lot of time really does come into the mold making aspect to make sure that you're going to have what you want in your final casting, a reproduction of this ash tree, pulling the detail that we want. So again, we're just going to take one of these sculpting tools and just sort of remove the excess clay that is around here. It's actually pushing it underneath as I do this too. So this is going to help us with the flashing. If we got any flashing under here, it may or may not be a big deal, but if we had a big gap underneath here, that flashing could go underneath there. The liquid rubber is going to find its way into any of these little nooks and crannies, and it could find its way underneath there, and it could actually encapsulate this model, and we would have an issue demolding it later, and we could have almost what's called like a mechanical lock, where we're actually having our model locked in the rubber and have to cut and slice a little bit more of the rubber than maybe you wanted to. Not inevitably, but there's going to be flashing at times when you make molds. The liquid rubber is going to find its way into any little nook and cranny, like I said. So typically the flashing can just be cut with a knife, an X-Acto razor. But if it's completely encasing the model underneath, you're going to have a hard time removing that. So again, going back to not covering up too much of the detail, you can see I'm trying to push this clay in these cracks and crevices. I don't want to just smear it all over my model, because then I wouldn't be able to see the wood grain tone. And when we get to the glazing later, after we cast some concrete in this model, the glazes, the Buddy Rhodes topical glazes, really accentuate the wood grain tone. And there's a lot of artists out there that can really recreate wood faux bois, if you will. And it's very popular when it comes to, again, lawn ornaments, lawn garden sculptures, but there are a lot of really good, talented concrete artisans who can make concrete countertops in a style sort of like a board form or a wood form style and make it look exactly like concrete. Later on, or excuse me, like it'll be concrete that looks exactly like wood. I'll show you some examples later on. So again, we've got all these little holes here. We want to make sure that we got that. This might be a sort of a neat one to keep open here and have that rubber, so when you do demold it and then you subsequently cast it, you'll sort of have this negative space. So we're going to cover it up a little bit, but not too much. Hope everybody's having a good day out there. Again, throughout this presentation, if you have any questions, do not hesitate to enter them in the chat function. I'd love to hear from any existing, any current customers, any of our friends, any relatives that are out there, any fellow mold makers, concrete casters. We are here for you to answer your questions. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and move on to our next phase here. We've got this pretty much filled in. There's this neat little knot here. We'll just put a little bit of clay in there, a little bit of clay in there. I want to keep that one open so we can have some more definition when we actually make that. Again, in the real world, I would really want to take my time, and I'm going to go ahead and clean this up just a little bit more since we're going to be pouring some rubber on here in a little bit. Really just want to take our time and remove any excess clay so that we don't take away any of that detail. And you can see right here, was a little generous with the clay here. So just pushing it down with a sculpting tool. These are nice tools here, these little caulking tools. These are actually used a lot in cake making for like fondant. But we use these a lot in the Buddy Rhodes world when we're caulking edges for melamine, and you would actually use this to get a nice beveled edge. Okay. All right, so we've got our clay applied. We have a relatively clean model. We went ahead and got rid of the debris. We secured it on the bottom of our melamine. We've got our air holes. It is moving and it's grooving on our Lazy Ernie. And we are getting ready to start to make our mold containment field. So looking at this model, we have a few options on how we would move forward with actually making a mold box or a mold containment field. The easiest way that people are going to look at this and they're going to think of a square. And what I could have done, and we'll just use these sticks as an example, I could have built melamine walls around my box, around my model, and have effectively just built a box. Going back to why we chose urethane being cost effective, this is a production mold. We want to save as much money in rubber as possible. So if we would have made a square or a rectangular mold, we would have all of this area wasted with rubber. Let me show you an example. When I first started this presentation, I was trying to identify how I would make this mold. So this is almost an example of what you should not do. You can see just the absolute amount of rubber that is not needed. One of the terms we're going to talk about in a little bit is durometer, and Vitaflex 40 is a 40 durometer. So we've got plenty of firmness in our mold walls. So making a round mold is going to be suitable for this specific casting. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to take some aluminum flashing and build a mold containment field around our piece of ash tree. So this will allow us to negate any unnecessary area over here and just keep our mold to what is exactly needed, just the 1/2 of an inch to the 3/4 of an inch mold wall over here. Prior to placing and securing the aluminum flashing, yes, my friends down under like to call it aluminium. I have a tendency to call it aluminium when I'm over here working with customers, and they get confused and they think I'm not from around here. I am not from around here. So what we're going to do is actually start by identifying where we want our mold wall, and we're going to do about 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch. So what I'm going to do right now is just sort of draw a dot that shows me where the 1/2 inch is coming from my model. So I got about 1/2 inch there, just about 1/2 inch there, 1/2 inch there, and another about 1/2 inch there. And what I'm going to do is actually draw a line around my model, and this is going to help me understand where I want to build the aluminum flashing. So we are just going to connect the dots, la la la, connect the dots, la la la. I definitely need my daughters for this one. My daughters are much better artists than me. That'll work. So we'll actually place a little tight right there. I missed my dot, but what we're going to do is just place the aluminum flashing right outside of there. So we have got our model secured to our melamine base. We went ahead and drew a Sharpie line around this. Now, prior to building our mold containment field, we want to take a look at our model, and we talked before about sealing a model. This is a relatively porous model, and when I say porous, it means even though it's a dry piece of wood, it's still got this porosity in it that can trap and suck the rubber from it. So what we want to do is actually seal it, and what we're going to do today is use this product, Sonite Wax. Sonite Wax is a great way to seal porous models. Stone, rock, wood, pieces of timber, as my friends down under call it. And Sonite Wax is a soft paste wax that is easily spread over your model. You can use a soft rag, you can use a brush. Today we're going to be using a brush. There are other options for sealing porous models, and it really could just be dependent upon your project, which is why we always ask that you go to the Smooth On, you go to the Buddy Rhodes website, enter a tech ticket, give us a call on the tech line, and we'll give you some advice on which sealer you should use. Maybe Super Seal is the choice. I know I've worked with a lot of wood and timber making molds. I've always found, and I did test this, I've always found that Sonite Wax is the better of the options. Sonite Wax is not a very volatile compound. It is not noxious by any means, but I am going to go ahead and put some gloves on just in case I spread a little bit more than I wanted to. So you can see the paste wax just comes out very nicely on a chip brush. We'll go ahead and apply it, and you can start to see immediately the changing of the color. You can see almost the dryness of the tree just really accepting the sealer and just, you know, really glossing up almost. You want to be generous, but you don't want to be too generous. We talked before about the clay taking away the detail. If I leave this lump of Sonite Wax in, it may not make a big, you know, it may not, the mold rubber may not make that exact indentation, but it's certainly going to have some of that elevation from this Sonite Wax. So we really want to make sure that we move it around thoroughly and making sure that we get full coverage, which is another reason we've got this lazy Ernie today that is just really helping me with getting full coverage. Trying to get the Sonite Wax into the nooks and crannies, making sure, again, you're not too thick with it, but not too thin, making sure we get full coverage. You can see I'm trying to stay within my mold containment field. The Sonite Wax can act as a slight barrier or release agent, not necessarily for the rubber, but maybe for some glue in a little bit when we start to glue the aluminum flashing onto my baseboard here. We don't want the Sonite Wax to act as any type of barrier. Now, Sonite Wax can be applied in a few coats. It really just depends on what your model is. Again, if it's a very, very porous model, a lot of holes, a lot of openings, you may need just a little bit more Sonite Wax. Typically, you want to wait 20 to 30 minutes to either applying your next coat of Sonite Wax or applying release agent and then pouring rubber on. We want to make sure that the Sonite Wax has completely penetrated the porosity of the model and making sure that we don't have any lumps laying around. So again, Sonite wax, excellent product for sealing porous models, specifically like this ash tree that we're working with today. So I'm going to go ahead and put Sonite wax over here for right now. So again, 20-30 minutes is a really good time to wait prior to going to the next step. For today's purposes, it being a cooking show style, we are going to absolutely jump to the next step, and that is going to be gluing our aluminum flashing walls on, or our mold containment field. I hope everybody's doing good out there again today. If anybody has any questions, don't hesitate to ask. We've got a lot of content on our YouTube channel. We've got some past presentations that have just been really great. Last week they did skin effects and life casting, and I actually cut myself shaving today. I was going to say that it was just leftover from the skin effects last week, but no. I was so nervous this morning I cut myself shaving. Mold making tip. This is a mold making tip from my good friend Milo. If you've seen the videos for making things with Milo, Milo does a great video of making a mold wall or mold containment field of an irregular shape. He's actually making a mold with a mold wall or a mold box around his model, which is a shield, and he uses aluminum flashing. This aluminum flashing, if you're working by yourself, can be a little floppy and flimsy, and you can have a tough time maybe holding it into place. So Milo, through the power of his YouTube video, taught me this nice little tip of actually gluing, whether it's a piece of melamine, and what I just did was cut up some paint sticks here, actually just gluing buttresses, whether they're going to just hold my mold wall in place. This is a relatively common practice when you see people making concrete countertops, when they're making very large melamine forms. They'll put additional support on the outside of the melamine form to ensure that the concrete doesn't push off on the walls. So you'll see this a lot when making melamine forms to subsequently cast concrete countertops in. We do that a lot. So you can do as many of these buttresses as possible, I guess, really just as long as you can get the aluminum flashing in there. For today's purposes, I'm just going to use probably about 4 or 5 here just to make sure that we can keep it in place. And making sure that I don't touch the hot end of the gun. I can tell you some stories about some past employees that just didn't know the right end of a hot glue gun or a heat gun and where to pick it up. I thankfully do. So we're going to keep our glue gun handy because we're going to need that in a moment. And we're going to go ahead and get our aluminum flashing. When I already cut this, this is some 3-inch aluminum flashing. So again, thinking about how tall your model is, we're really looking for about a 1/2 inch mold wall on the sides. We're also looking for about a 1/2 inch mold wall on the top. So if, obviously I don't need to pour this to the very tippy top of the aluminum flashing, but if the aluminum flashing came below my model, then obviously we would have an issue with that. So what we're going to do is just going to start by putting a little bead of glue right at the tip of this buttress, and we're going to go ahead and start to feed this aluminum flashing around my model. Being mindful that this aluminum flashing can be sharp, so our friends at home, if you're working with this, please be careful not to cut yourself. I'm not saying I cut myself, not saying I didn't cut myself. Okay, so then what you can do is actually just go ahead and follow the flashing around with a bead of hot glue. So we're actually just going to go ahead and try to line it up as best as possible with our 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch mold wall Sharpie line that we drew there, and actually just go ahead and apply some glue. I have a tendency to go overboard with glue. Somebody said I've used as much glue on this project as they have used in the entire year so far in the large state of Rhode Island. I don't think that that is actually true, but I do have a tendency to go overboard with this hot glue because I really want to make sure my mold containment field, my mold wall, stays in place. I don't want it to come apart. And we're going to talk a little bit about that later when we get into mixing and pouring the rubber. And we'll talk about a term called pot life. And there's and when and how, when you should walk away from a freshly poured mold. So I'm going to just go ahead and glue that there and continue to apply the hot glue around the aluminum flashing. Again, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to go to the chat box there, ask us any questions you have. We're going to be segueing shortly into the actual mixing and pouring of the rubber and precursor to pouring the concrete here in a little bit. So just, again, taking your time. If this maybe wasn't on camera, I'd probably ask maybe somebody for help. Hey, you hold this over here while I put this on here. But I am self-sufficient today, making sure this is properly secured. So to reiterate, so far we've got an ash tree. An ash tree is a pretty popular tree here in Pennsylvania. It was a fell tree in my associate's backyard. He cut me up a bunch of chunks of it. So one of the things, when I was doing the clay before, the clay didn't take me that long, and because the model is relatively smooth. We're going to be looking at a model here in a moment that has a lot of detail. And that's something to think about when you're building these mold containment fields with the 1/2 of an inch, 3/4 of an inch, making sure you have enough area for the rubber to go in and have thick enough mold walls when we later cast concrete in it. But so I was talking about the tree models. One of the other models you'll see me pull out is a honey locust tree. Real nice tree with some really nice bark on it. As I said, unfortunately, this was a fallen tree that did have it was relatively dry, so the bark was just coming off left and right. And this was the perfect size of the model that we were looking for, so I really wanted to make sure that we could get something done on camera. But I'm going to show you the other model that I was working with, the locust tree, the honey locust, and it's really nice. It's got a lot of detail, but adding the clay it took a lot longer to add the clay gasket around the bottom of that tree. There was just so much more detail to go in and out of those nooks and crannies and grooves that we really wanted to make sure that we didn't lose that. And we also wanted to make sure that we could get this done in a timely manner. And you guys don't want to sit here and watch me clay pieces of timber all day. So again, I would highly recommend maybe coming back around this with another swath of glue. It is certainly not going to hurt it. I'm pretty sure there's not a hot glue shortage in America, so we should be fine with that. There is a chicken wing shortage. I just got hit with a surcharge on chicken wings, so I'm not real happy about that. Okay, so to reiterate where we are at right now, we have got our porous tree model secured to a melamine base to make a flat back or a block mold. We've got air holes drilled at the bottom. That is going to allow any air bubbles to escape from the bottom, thanks to my lazy Ernie under here. And they're not going to push up so that they're actually on the face of the mold that can then be recreated and taken into our castings when we make concrete out of them. We have built a clay gasket around the bottom to avoid any flashing. We've also applied clay inside any of these cracks, nooks and crannies and crevices to ensure that our liquid rubber does not seep into there. We sealed our model with sonite paste wax, and that's blocking in, that's helping the porosity so that our rubber can actually, it's helping it to the ease of demolding later, and we're going to talk about that when we apply some release agent. We put our glue, we glued some buttresses, we drew a line with a Sharpie around here, and we built our mold containment field. So we are getting very close to mixing and pouring rubber. But before we do that, we want to talk about what you need to do before you mix and apply polyurethane. One of the biggest disadvantages that we showed before was its adhesive nature and its adhesive quality. You've got to use a release agent when you're pouring rubber over your model. You've got to use a release agent on your model, and you've got to use a form release when you're actually casting concrete into a rubber, polyurethane rubber mold. So for this instance, we're going to use a silicone-based release agent, universal release agent. So universal release agent, you just want to hold it a few inches away from your model. This is in an aerosol can. It does come in liquid forms. It's going to plume a little bit. I'll put my safety glasses on. It's not extremely noxious by any means, but you can see we just want to make sure we get a nice little coverage. Additionally, you want to make sure that you release your mold walls. So if this was melamine or if this was acrylic walls, you absolutely want to make sure that the release agent goes on your mold walls as well as on your base. Depending upon the size or how big your model is or where your flash or where your mold wall is, it's a good idea to use a small chip brush and actually just ensure that the release agent has been properly applied over the model, doing a quick brush, if you will. And then typically what we'll do is come back and do another quick spray. And you do want to wait a few minutes prior to mixing and pouring rubber over top of the universal release agent. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to segue into the material itself, which is Vitaflex 40. Vitaflex 40 is a 1-to-1 mixed ratio polyurethane. It is probably the most popular product that we use when it comes to casting concrete. We talked before about urethanes and the advantages and the disadvantages, and one of the biggest advantages is the cost effectiveness and the longevity that you can get from Vitaflex molds. So Vitaflex is perfect for casting concrete. If you're casting pigmented concrete, your pigmented concrete has the best chance of retaining that color when working with the Vitaflex. Some other rubbers out there can actually transfer the color from the pigmented concrete onto your mold or vice versa. So it's just absolutely great when it comes to that. It comes in a wide variety of durometers. It's easy to mix 1-to-1 mix ratio. So before we go any further about Vitaflex, let's talk about some terminology that comes into line when we're working with these liquid rubbers. And this can be segued over to silicone, but we're focused on polyurethane today. So some of these terms are going to be very important for us today. And the first term we're going to talk about is durometer. So we've already sort of segued in and jumped around durometer a few times today. Durometer refers to the hardness or the firmness or the softness even at times of the material you're working with. There are two main scales that is measured on, specifically here at Smooth On that we use, and that's going to be a Shore A and a Shore D. Shore D refers to the rigidity or the hardness, the firmness of a plastic or an epoxy. So we don't necessarily have to worry about that today because we are working with flexible rubber, and that being Vitaflex. So Vitaflex and other polyurethanes are judged on a scale or based on a scale from 0 to 90 as a durometer. 0 being as soft as something like a piece of gelatin or a gummy bear, very, very soft. 90 durometer being as hard and stiff as a hard hat, or something very, very like a car tire, something very, very something that you'd have an issue demolding. So one of the questions we got early on the chat was, how do you know which durometer or which product that you would use? You also, if you remember in the beginning, I talked about thinking at the end what you want as an end result. What are you casting? We're casting concrete in it. We're casting Buddy Rhodes GFRC polymer modified concrete. It doesn't have a lot of aggregate in it. It doesn't have a lot of large pieces of stone and pebble and things like that. If we were casting a very heavy aggregate, a very heavy mix, or really any type of concrete, we want to steer away from the lower durometer scales. Those 10s, 20s, and sometimes even 30s can push out on our mold wall, and actually you'd end up having a deformed casting. On the opposite end, if you chose something like an 80 or a 90 durometer, you'd have a hard time demolding it. We want a flexible rubber. We want to be able to peel the rubber off of our prepared model and have an ease of demolding. So Vitaflex 40 sort of falls right in the middle. It is easy to demold. Given a 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch mold wall, you're not going to have anything push out from when you're casting in it. Vitaflex 40 has been used, pretty much countless times in a lot of concrete casting, whether you're making stone veneer, edge bands, cast stone, capstones, corbels. Vitaflex series, specifically Vitaflex 40, is really where you're going to fall into line at. So Vitaflex 40 for this project is what we chose. And we'll talk about another term right now, and that's going to be mix ratio. And it's another reason we chose this product is the ease of mix ratio. Mix ratio is a term that dictates how much material you need, part A and part B in this case, to have a cured mold. So one of the reasons, again, we chose Vitaflex 40 was the 1-to-1 mix ratio. And the reason we didn't choose a silicone was some of the silicones can require precise measurement with a gram scale. Some of the mix ratios are a little bit different, such as like a 10-to-1. So we really wanted to keep this relatively easy today, and we were looking for a 1-to-1 mix ratio, which is a great choice for this specific project for on camera, of course, today, which is why we chose the Vitaflex 40. Another term that we're going to talk about is viscosity. Viscosity refers to how the material flows. And it actually can be gauged with a term called centipoise, not centipede, my third favorite all-time video game behind Miss Pac-Man and Dig Dug. Not centipede, but centipoise. Centipoise refers to how the material flows. And on the screen we put a chart. 0 centipoise is something like water. It's just going to flow very, very well. Up to something like 100,000 centipoise, which is molasses, very, very slow. So those are things to think about when you're mixing and pouring this rubber over your model. What is the viscosity of your material? The viscosity of Vitaflex 40 is right around 2,000, so just a little less than motor oil. So you're going to see that it's very easy to mix it, and it is very easy to blend it thoroughly and then pour it over our prepared model. So that is viscosity. The next term we're going to talk about is pot life. Pot life refers to the amount of time that you have to combine these materials. Remember, we said it's equal part A to equal part B. That's our mix ratio. So when I add my equal part A and equal part B together, that's when the pot life begins. The pot life is absolutely going to vary and be different depending upon which product you're using. Something like our smooth cast resin series has 2 and 3 minute pot lives. We have some other silicones that have 10, maybe 15-minute pot lives. We have, when you jump up the scale in Vitaflex series, something like a 50 and a 60 Vitaflex actually have 60-minute pot lives. Anything 40, 30, 20, and 10 in the Vitaflex series is a 30-minute pot life. 30-minute pot life is going to give me plenty amount of time to mix and pour my liquid rubber over my model. Going back to that term viscosity, it can have a tendency, the viscosity can go into these nooks and crannies. So later in the pot life, and when it actually starts to gel up, it can actually be a little bit more firm and it won't go into those nooks and crannies of our model. So those were the terms we talked about. We talked about viscosity, we talked about pot life, we talked about durometer, and we talked about mix ratio. Before we jump into the Vitaflex, I want to just give a couple examples of some world life experience with Vitaflex. Again, Vitaflex is pretty much the most common product we have out there in the concrete industry. We work in the concrete division here at Smooth On, which means we help people with mold making as well as concrete casting tech questions. So a lot of times people ask us what products to use and what to cast in them. Vitaflex 40 is used prevalently with stone veneer and cast stone manufacturers. So on the screen now you see an example of stone veneer mold, and this is also a Vitaflex 40. So you can see it's going to capture the detail, not a lot of undercuts, but you see the grout marks is going to make it very easy for demolding. This next picture is actually going to show us an example of a different mold being cast, being pulled off of a model here. So, but Vitaflex, again, a lot of cast stone, stone veneer, capstones, real large form liners. Here's an example of a stone veneer mold actually being pulled right off of some stone. So for those of you that thought all those houses have real stone on the side of them, they are not. It's actually concrete. Here's an example of a very large form liner. So same thing, when you're driving down the highway and you see those faux rock walls and those sound barriers, those decorative sound barriers, here's a real world example of Vitaflex being used for very large sound panels. So again, you want to think about when you're casting something like this, what is being cast on this? So you want to think about the durometer. So that was actually a picture of a Vitaflex 60 durometer because it was a much larger casting, much larger mold. So now we're ready to get into mixing and pouring our rubber. We have our Vitaflex 40, 1-to-1 mix ratio, equal part A and equal part B. One of the beautiful things about the Smooth-On products is they come in color-coded buckets, make it very easy for people like Ernie. A is going to come in yellow, B is going to come in your blue. So what we're going to do right now is we are going to take a look at each components of these, mix, combine, and then pour it over our prepared model. So we're going to start with our part B. Part B is going to be the thinner of the material. It's not as viscous as our part A. Part A is also a little bit more moisture sensitive. One of the disadvantages we talked about earlier with polyurethanes is they can be affected by humidity or moisture in the air. So with the part A, we don't want our part A exposed to any additional moisture if it doesn't need to be. So we're going to start with our part B and actually dispense my part B and then dispense my part A prior to combining them. So we're going to definitely safety up here. I'm putting my glasses on. I had a text from a friend of mine last night and said he was happy to see that I was wearing my glasses in this presentation. Long time ago, I graduated high school, and I really wanted to be like most humorous, most active, most energetic, most likely to be a Smooth-On YouTube star. I got best eyes. Best eyes? Whatever. But these babies have been my money makers throughout my life, so I'm always going to keep them protected. So we're going to put on some safety glasses, and we're going to be putting on some gloves, some nitrile gloves here before we dispense our rubber. So if you notice on the top of my part B, it says stir well before using. The part B can actually settle at the bottom, so we want to make sure that it is thoroughly mixed up. To open the units, we're using a 1-gallon unit for this project today. The Smooth-On materials come in something smaller, a trial size or a pint unit. It comes in 5-gallon units, 55-gallon units, up to 2,200-pound tote units. You want to think about your project. You want to think about one of the things we talked about before with the polyurethane, limited shelf life. People have a tendency to go to these big box stores and buy as much toilet paper and paper towels as they want because it's non-perishable. It's going to last forever. It's something to think about when you're purchasing the Smooth-On, specifically the polyurethanes. There is a limited shelf life. It's right around 6 months opened to about a year unopened. So you want to make sure that you're going to be using these products in a timely manner and not taking the lid off and putting the lid back on a lot of times. So if you're doing a small project, maybe you start off with a trial kit. Maybe it's a 1-gallon unit before you start to move up to the 5-gallon units. So we're going to start with opening our part B. This is a bucket opener. There's actually an FAQ on the Smooth-On website. How do I open these buckets? If you don't have one of these, you could be like some people I know and they just use their man hands and open these up. I have very delicate baby hands. Actually, I have old man hands now. So I'm going to use this bucket opener to open up the lid off of here. You'll see there's these little cut slots here. You can cut those to make it a little bit easier to open it up. Place our lid right there. So you can see this is our part B. We're going to go ahead and stir that up so that we can get any unblended material at the bottom of our part B. And just a nice little stir there. Okay. And we're going to go ahead and dispense this. Beauty of Vitaflex, equal part A by volume or equal part A by weight. Today we're going to be using weight because I know exactly how much we need, but a nice little mold making and casting tip would be if you're making a bunch of molds and you know exactly how much volume you need, you can take a container, and since it is 1-to-1 by volume, We'll sometimes just draw a little line at the bottom, at the top of our bucket, and just pour the liquid rubber right up to the top of the bucket, whether it's a popcorn bucket or another mixing vessel. And as long as you have equal part A and equal part B, you can combine them. This project I've been working on quite a bit, so I know pretty much how much material I need. The mold that I'm going to be making is right around 7 pounds. If you're wondering how much material to use, oh boy, I just did that, didn't I? There we go, 0. If you're wondering how much material you will need for a project, go to the Smooth On website. We have a material calculator. You can plug in the size or the shape of your model, the exact dimensions of your mold box or your mold containment field. You can plug in the exact material that you're going to be using, and it's going to give you an estimate, usually about 10% plus, of how much material you're going to need. So again, for this project, I know I need 7 pounds of material. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go ahead and dispense 3.5 pounds of B, and then 3.5 pounds of A for this mold. I'm going to go ahead and scrape those sticks. Again, I'm wearing gloves and glasses for this to ensure that I'm being safe. Safety first. So go ahead and make sure we are nice and level on here. If you've seen any previous Smooth On presentations, there have been some messes. I am the cleanest person in the Smooth On Concrete team. Everyone just compliments me on how clean I am, how much I clean. I can't tell you how much my wife tells me, thank you, Ernie, for cleaning the house. Thank you, Ernie, for just being so neat and tidy. So here we go. And I can't see the scale. So I'm going to ask my associate, who's standing right in front of me, to let me know when I get to right around 3.5 pounds. In case you, he's not on camera, but this is Adam, our moderator. He's been quickly typing back there, getting jokes out at 2 pounds. Thank you very much, Adam. 2.6, the countdown.
9, cut it off.
Cut it off, he says. Where are we at?
3.1.
3.1. We want 3.5 pounds.
Oh, you want 3.5?
We want 3.5. That's okay. Maybe Adam and I should have practiced this presentation a few more times. How are we at? 3.5?
3.2.
3.2.
3, 4. Good.
Okay. All right. So we got about 3.5 pounds of our part B in our mixing vessel. Always being mindful. Like I said, Ernie's the cleanest person that he knows. Wiping up any extra material off of our buckets and securing those lids back on top of our material so that we can use them at a later date. So we'll go ahead and slide that down here. And we have got our dispensed part B that we're going to slide over to here. And now we're going to focus on our part A. Being the more moisture sensitive of the two products, we wanted to wait until the second dispense or decant to actually put this into our material. Adam says, well, Ernie, why don't you just move that scale around? Well, I thought part of the production, Alex and the production team told me that the scale was going to be 3D and the numbers were going to be jumping out at the screen. So I didn't want to take that away from him. We got a lot of neat toys and tools that we use here in the video department. And put your 3D glasses on now. There was an old movie back in the day called The Mask. Those 3D, I loved old 3D movies, and they would always warn you about 30 seconds before, put your 3D glasses on now. There's no 3D of this presentation today. All right, so what we're going to do now is actually go ahead and weigh out about 3.5 pounds of our part A. We do not need to pre-stir the part A, but if you can see, it is a lot thicker. It's a lot more viscous than our part B. So we're going to go ahead and pour this into here. I can actually see the scale this time. This is nice. We'll go ahead and give ourselves right around 3.5 pounds. And we're going to match this up too, because again, if you recall, this is equal part A to equal part B by volume. So we'll make sure that we have just the right amount. Mold maker measuring, batching out tip, always be mindful of what unit your scale is on. I unfortunately have done this a few times where I will go from pounds to grams or to kgs or inches to feet or whatever it is and forget that. And I've certainly done that in the past where I've weighed out concrete in pounds and then weighed out water in kgs, and it just didn't really work out. So that's always something to be extremely mindful of. And that just reminds me of the metric system. And I will do my best to transfer these into the metric system on camera, but that's what these people behind the scenes are for in the chat box. So we use the imperial system here. I was over in London last summer, and there we go, perfect. Excuse me, 2 summers ago, doing some training, and for 3 days, all I did in my head was try to transfer everything over into metric. kgs and milliliters, and just it was driving me nuts. Then about on the final day of the presentation, somebody raised their hand. They said, Ernie, we use the imperial system over here too. We don't use the metric system. They were just laughing at me, watching me try to do math in my head, and I'm not a very good math person. Okay, so we've got our equal part A, we've got our equal part B, and what we're going to do now is we have our prepared model. If you recall, we secured our model to our melamine base. We drilled holes to allow any potential airflow and bubbles to escape at the bottom. We sealed it with sonite wax. We glued a mold containment field around it. We applied universal release agent, silicone-based release agent, to allow our rubber, our cured rubber, to be demolded. So now, again, our pot life has not started until I combine these two. And if you recall Vitaflex 40, pot life of 30 minutes. So we're going to have plenty of time to thoroughly mix this material prior to pouring it over our model here. So what we're actually going to do is pour our liquid A into our liquid B. It being the more viscous of the materials, it's actually going to help us make sure that it's properly mixed and blended. Always scraping the bottom of our buckets when we're transferring into another container to make sure that we have all of our material out. Again, it's equal part A to equal part B, so we want to make sure that we have all of the material transferred. So that term that we talked about before, pot life, has just begun. The pot life is 30 minutes for Vitaflex 40. It's going to give us plenty of time to mix and pour this rubber over it, but you don't want to dilly-dally and dolly too much. I mean, I could sit here and tell stories all day, but I'm not going to do that. We're going to start mixing. So we're going to start to thoroughly mix this material. So mixing it, what we like to say is mixing it deliberately. You're not beating it and you're not hurting the rubber. That is going to allow for air to be, the potential for air to be trapped inside there, and then you could actually have some bubbles rising to the face of your mold. We've got a 30-minute pot life. We've got plenty of time to mix this thoroughly and deliberately. Mixing it around, scraping the sides of our container, scraping the bottom of our container, making sure that we have everything thoroughly mixed and blended. So that's another reason we're using these clear containers today. So you can actually, if you see at the bottom of this clear container, you can actually start to see some material that has not been blended very well. So we really want to make sure that we scrape the sides and scrape the bottom. We recommend that you mix this for around 3 minutes. So again, 3 minutes in a 30-minute pot life, no problem. If you start to, anything in a gallon, pint unit, anything this small, very easily hand mixed with a paint stick or some type of flat mixing tool. If you get to anything larger, maybe like a 5-gallon unit, you can start to use like a turbine mixer with a drill. You do want to be mindful not whipping too much air into that. And then if you get to even larger containers like drums and tote units, we sell a machine called the Easy Mix meter machine that actually dispenses rubber 1-to-1, and it's used in a lot of large formliner companies. So that's a pretty neat thing. Again, take a look at the Smooth On and Buddy Rhodes YouTube channels for all those videos. Now, some people would say my material it's completely blended. Let's just start pouring it over the model. At Smooth On, we like to employ the double mix method. So the double mix method is going to ensure that I don't have any unmixed material at the bottom of this mixing vessel. So what I'm going to do is just take my first stick here and just scrape it off, make sure I have everything off on here. And I'm actually going to transfer this in to a new clean mixing container. We want no striations, hesitations, or variations. And you can sort of start to see there is some unmixed material right there. So we did not want that. That could tend to have cure inhibition in our mold. If it does cure, it may not cure to the full strength, the full durometer of a 40. So we want to make sure that we get all of this material transferred from our first mixing container, scraping the sides, scraping the bottom, into our new clean mixing vessel. I get it. Buddy picks on me a good bit about, we have a tendency to just use a lot of popcorn buckets and overuse buckets here. We want to make sure our molds are successful when they're being made. This material, a lot of people, whether you're a DIY, production, new person to this, you don't want to waste money. You want to follow the information that's given to you. That's why each smooth-on product comes with what's called a technical bulletin. Technical bulletin is going to lay those terms down that we talked about before: viscosity, mix ratio, pot life, and you want to be very mindful of that. I get what it's like to have, not want to use a fresh, clean bucket right now. I travel around a lot to see customers and visit different concrete countertop customers, stone veneer customers, and sometimes I'll say, hey, come on out to the van. I have a hat or a margin trowel, or maybe even a small trowel kit of something if you're a good customer. And then sometimes I'll have some yellow and blue buckets, and they'll be like, well, what are you going to do with those buckets, man? They'd never want my shirts or my hats or my margin trowels. All they want are my buckets. So I'm not giving them away today. All right, so right now we are thoroughly blended and mixed. Again, about 3 minutes we've mixed this deliberately, not whipping a bunch of air in. 30-minute pot life, we've got plenty of time to pour this over our model. To reiterate, our model has been secured. It has air vent holes drilled at the bottom. We have secured it. We have sealed it with sonite wax. We have applied universal mold release, and we have a mold containment field built around it. So what we're going to do now is, it is the time that everyone's been waiting for, watching Ernie pour rubber. I hope everyone's having a good day out there today. We're going to segue shortly after this rubber portion into the concrete portion. So I've got my prepared model here. I'm going to pour my rubber out. Now, when you're pouring a flat mold or a block mold, you want to find, pretty much when you're pouring rubber over your model, you want to find the lowest point of the model. And the lowest point today is going to be the base of the melamine. You don't need to pour the material over top of the model. The material is going to self-level as long as our table is level. So what you want to do to eliminate additional air bubbles is pour it in a nice thin stream at the lowest part of the model or your mold box, and allow the rubber to find its way over top of the model. So again, I'm just trying to slowly pour this. Now, when you work with silicones, it's always a good idea to pour it in a very, very thin stream. But I've sort of taken this over when I pour polyurethanes as well, because it really does eliminate any potential for air bubbles. Now, again, I mixed it nice and thoroughly, deliberately, and slowly with a stick. I didn't use any mechanical force that can really put some potential air bubbles in there. But this is really going to ensure that I have the longest life of a production mold. I want it to capture the detail of the piece of ash tree. I don't want any bubbles or any foreign products inside here. So I'm just going to slowly pour this over. You can see that it's making its way over the model. Sometimes the rubber will make a neat little shape. The one time it actually made the shape of Australia, and I was hoping to give a shout out to my friends down under, but nope, today it looks like it's going to make the shape of possibly Florida. So I guess shout out to my friends in Florida today, and anybody that might happen to be at Disney World today. So slowly pouring this rubber. We still have plenty of time in our pot life, 30-minute pot life. We're maybe about 10 minutes into the pot life. So we've got plenty of time to allow this rubber to find its way over the model. And there goes our model. It's making a half a moon shape. It looks like a burrito. And it's found its way completely over. Perfect. And we want to make sure that we get all of our material out of our mixing container, because again, we don't want to lose any of this rubber that we've poured, that we've mixed, and we want to make sure that we have a proper thickness of our mold wall. So again, we're looking at right around 1/2 of an inch to 3/4 of an inch mold wall. But that also goes for the top, or what's effectively going to be the bottom of this mold when it's demolded. So we're going to go ahead and make sure we get all of that out of there into over our model. So there's still a little bit in there. We could certainly scrape the sides here, get that out, but I think we're at a pretty good thickness. But we'll go ahead and put that in there right there. Perfect. That little dollop will do ya. A good way to test the depth of your mold is just to take a popsicle stick or a stick and identify, and we've got easily 1/2 of an inch there, if not 3/4 of an inch. So we've got plenty of rubber that's going to be firm enough for when we cast our concrete in it. Mold maker's tip. Talked about this with a good friend of mine who used to work here. We poured a very, very large mold. It was a square mold containment box. We poured the liquid rubber into it. He said, "Hey, let's go get some sushi." We left to go get sushi. We came out, and unfortunately, that liquid rubber found its way out of a very tiny little crack in our mold wall. It was not watertight, and that's what you want, is this mold containment field to be watertight. If by some chance you do spring a small leak, keep some of this Sculptex clay, the sulfur-free Sculptex clay handy. It's actually going to allow you to, right here, if you can see in the front, I didn't use enough hot glue that they use in Rhode Island. I actually am going to have to actually plug this up, and I'll build a small little dam here and just allow this to trap the rubber in. And the nice thing is, right around the 30-minute pot life, when it starts to gel up, it's not going to find its way out of there anymore. You can start to see any air bubbles are actually coming to the top of the mold. That's what we want. We don't want the air bubbles to be trapped at the bottom and into the face. We want them to come to the back of our mold. And we've got it pretty much secured. And again, using our lazy Ernie here, we're able to give us a nice 360 view. Vitaflex 40 cures at 72 Fahrenheit, 22 Celsius in 16 hours. So I'm glad you joined me today, because what we are going to do now is we're going to watch rubber cure. So if everybody could just sit back for the next 16 hours, we're going to go ahead and watch this rubber cure, and then we'll demold it later today. So if you guys want to get something to eat and drink, would never do that to you. So what we're actually going to do is I actually poured another similar mold off of a similar model yesterday. So what we're actually going to do is demold that. So I'm going to slide this mold. This can be a bit of a gingerly aspect here, and we want to make sure that typically we'll recommend that you don't move the mold when it's still in its liquid form. You want to make sure that it gels up. But I'm a professional. I've been doing this for a long time. So I'm going to go ahead and just slide my mold right over here. My recently poured mold right over there. Okay. So we've got a mold that we poured over a similar model yesterday. I'm going to take this time to just clean up and say again thanks to everybody who's watching our presentation today, making a production mold of a piece of wood and subsequently casting it in concrete. And that's what we're going to be segueing into in a moment, into the Buddy Rhodes concrete portion of it. So I've got a mold here that I cast yesterday. Very similar to what we had yesterday, or excuse me, what we had today. We have a melamine base. We have got these holes drilled at the bottom. We'll show that to you later. We have our buttresses glued here. We used hot melt glue. We used the aluminum flashing. This is a nice little tip that my friend Milo also taught me. to remove hot glue, if you take just a little bit of isopropyl alcohol, it really loosens that up. And you'll see that in Milo's video that he does of making a mold of an irregular shape of a shield. And it just really allows you to help demold your mold box. Now again, you could be using a mold box that has countersunk screws. They may have brad nails in it. You might actually have to take apart your mold box. A lot of times people really want to try to reuse any mold containment walls, melamine if at all possible. So we'll just go ahead and pop this glue up here and peel that off. Okay. Looks like it's actually taken some of the flashing off as well, which is what we wanted. Perfect. So we're going to go ahead and remove this flashing. That came off nicely, thankfully, to the universal mold release. So we're going to go ahead and set our flashing down here. We have got our mold and we're ready to demold it. This is always like Christmas morning for people, opening up the present. So you just want to sort of break that barrier. If it takes sometimes a little tool, maybe a wedge tool, just a pry bar just to get that up. And it is Christmas morning. There we go. So there we go. And then just a little bit of flashing back there, nothing too major. We can trim that off in a little bit. But you can see bringing the detail, the wood grain texture from my ash tree model. You can see the model that I prepared yesterday has the sonite wax, the clay around the edges, but all the detail from the side of it. Again, I'm going to show you a different mold in a moment with some tree bark on it, and it has some really, really neat texture. But this, I think this mold came out really nicely for the project, making to recreate something like this in concrete. It's a nice size, very easily transported. Maybe my foot might be a little too big for this, but my kids' feet are perfect for this. So it could be a really nice walkway. So that is our Vitaflex 40 mold cast yesterday, 16-hour cure time at 73 Fahrenheit, 22 Celsius, and that is our mold. Okay, now let's get dirty. So we're going to go ahead and move into the concrete casting portion. So to reiterate, we have made, the theory of this was to make a production style mold with Vitaflex 40 to get as many concrete castings as possible. So now we're going to segue into casting Buddy Rhodes concrete products, a Buddy Rhodes concrete product. And what we're going to be casting is Buddy Rhodes GFRC. So the reason I chose Buddy Rhodes GFRC glass fiber reinforced concrete mix, it's the most versatile mix that we have. You can pack it, you can pour it, you can press it, you can spray it. It's really the most, if Vitaflex 40 is the most common polyurethane, Buddy Rhodes GFRC is definitely the most common product that we sell to concrete countertops, furniture makers, people that make any type of decorative concrete. It can top out at around 12,000 PSI. It is bone white mix. Each 50-pound blended bag covers 5 square foot. Again, it's a bone white base, very easy to add color, and in a moment you're going to see me add some pigment when we start to mix some concrete. So the Buddy Rhodes GFRC was chosen for this project mainly because of its versatility, the color that we want to add to it, and just the ease of use. The GFRC again stands for glass fiber reinforced concrete. There are no fibers within the Buddy Rhodes blend. You actually need to add the fibers, and you're going to see me add the fibers here in a moment. So, in the interest of me not making a mess and not being extremely loud with the equipment and the tools, what I did was take one of the other molds, the mold that I'm going to be focusing when we start to showcase the glazes. You're going to see me cast some Buddy Rhodes GFRC into a mold that has some bark texture. So this was another mold that I started making for this project, but I wanted to really use that casting, that mold and that casting for the glazing portion of it. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to segue into a video yesterday of me casting Buddy Rhodes GFRC in the smooth-on Buddy Rhodes concrete shop, and we'll go ahead and get into that right now. So here I am applying Aquacon form release. Remember, it's a polyurethane mold, so even when you're casting concrete, you need to have a form release. Here's the mix design. I said each blended 50-pound bag covers 5 square foot. I knew for this mix I was going to need around a half a bag. So I weighed out 25 pounds of my blended mix. And here I'm weighing out some water. We have found that when you work with chilled water, adding ice to it is actually going to retard the mix, slow it down, and give you just a little bit more working time. So here I am weighing out my water, right around a little under 4.5 pounds. The fiber reinforcement that we chose for this project is going to be the PVA fibers, the polyvinyl alcohol fibers. We chose the 15s and the 100s. The beauties of those fibers are they're not noticeable when you cast them in the face. Even if they are in the face, you can actually burnish them off very nicely. We chose the sand pigment. Again, we want to start with a base color as all of our as our GFRC is a bone white mix. So we want to start off with a nice base tone of something like a wood. So we chose some sand. And then I was putting some water reducer. Water reducer is going to allow us to eliminate the amount of to reduce the want to add more water to our mix. So you see here on the screen right now is our mix recipe, and I just want to reiterate the mix recipe. We used about a half a pound of Buddy Road's GFRC blended, 4.3 pounds of chilled water, a half a pound of sand pigment, 28 and some grams of PVA fibers, 56.69 pounds of PVA 100 fibers, and then that water reducer is something I wanted to reiterate. People have a tendency to want to have a better flow for their mix, and they just add more water. All of the Buddy Roads mix designs are based on a 0.33 water to cement ratio. That is going to allow it to have the ultimate cure strength when it's properly cured. So adding water reducer is going to eliminate that need to add more water and give you a better flow. The water reducer we chose for this was water reducer 555. Okay, so now you're going to start to see me moving through the video here and actually combining my products here. So here I have my chilled water in a bucket. You can notice I have all my safety precautions on. I have gloves, glasses, mask. I put my signature pigment in the water and I actually disperse that a little bit so that it's properly dispersed in my casting. We're going to dump about 3/4 of the amount of powder that we need and mix that up. And the reason we do that is it's actually going to allow us to get the flow that we're looking for, and then if we need to add any water reducer prior to adding more of the powder. So now we went ahead and added the powder and just a little bit of water reducer. You can see I have an exhaust fan there taking away any dust, plumes, and fumes from the concrete. And I'm going to thoroughly mix the material. I have my concrete blend in here, I have pigment, and I have chilled water. So I'm going to thoroughly mix that, making sure that I'm going to get the bottoms, the sides. I'm scraping the sides and the bottom, very similar to what I did with the rubber before, making sure that we don't have any powder on the side of the bucket. Tap that and put that in there. Mixing it up a little bit further to ensure that everything is fully dispersed. And now we're going to add the PVA fibers. The PVA fibers are what's called monofilament fibers, so they're actually very suitable for SCC castings, and that's what we're doing right now, self-consolidating concrete. And they're going to actually break up nicely within that mix. AR glass fibers, you don't want to beat them up too much in the mix because you can actually harm them and actually break them. These monofilament fibers are perfect for this this casting. So you see me, I'm now testing the material to see what the flow is. With Buddy Road's GFRC and a lot of GFRC mixes, it's going to do that right there. It's going to stiffen up after a few minutes, and that's something called a false set. So the false set can actually, avoid it being properly poured into your model, or excuse me, into your mold. So what we do is we usually let it rest for about 10 minutes and then come back, add maybe just a little bit more water reducer, and then mix it back up, spin it back up nicely to make sure that it's fully blended. And here you can see I'm pouring it into my prepared model. When I say prepared, it's got Aquacon release agent on it. And we're actually pouring it on a vibration table. The vibration table is going to help us eliminate any air bubbles that could get trapped down at the bottom or the face of this mold. So I turn on the vibration table. If you don't have a vibration table, you can take a rubber mallet. Some people will take a palm sander, specifically if it's something like a melamine form. And you can actually hold that on the side of your melamine form. That water reducer that I talked about before, the polycarboxylate 555, that's what pushes those bubbles to the top. We wait about an hour for the material to partially set up, and then we place a piece of plastic, at least a piece of plastic over it. That is going to help trap in the moisture of this concrete and allow for better curing. Now, when you're casting concrete, we talked before about, form building and preparation. That is something you've got to take into consideration when you are casting concrete. Taking your time, following all the steps, goes back to the rubber casting portion, goes back to the mold making portion. You're going to get out of it what you put into it. This is a common joke I use a lot with the concrete cowboys that we work with. They like to cast concrete on a Monday, take it out of the form on a Tuesday and process it, seal it on a Wednesday, install it on a Thursday, and be at the bar on a Friday. That is not an ideal process at all. You want to take your time. You want to make sure that your concrete is properly cured. Buddy Road's GFRC cures in 16 hours or 24 hours overnight at, again, the 72 Fahrenheit. So we want to make sure that we put at least plastic. When you get into some other castings, and this is maybe something you want to take a look at some of our videos on YouTube, reach out to us when it comes to proper curing. What are the proper ways to cure a piece of concrete? Some people will go further than just a piece of plastic, putting moving blankets, maybe even heating blankets to trap that heat in for a very, very strong cure. For what we're making here, the GFRC, it tops out around 12,000 PSI at full cure. So this is going to be fine that we can actually demold this today. So we put the piece of plastic on it, and you can see that it actually trapped that moisture in the back or the top of this mold. And that's what we want. We don't want the moisture to escape, which is basically just going to make for, unfortunately, weaker concrete. You can start to see just some of the PVA fibers. They're no problem. We can actually just burnish those off. This is on the bottom of it anyway, so it's not a problem. So this was a Vitaflex 40 mold. Let's see how we want to do this. We'll do it this way. The reason we chose Vitaflex 40, it's a polyurethane. We did apply the Aquacon release agent, but one of the reasons we chose Vitaflex 40 was the ease of demolding, the flexibleness of when we're pulling this off of our model. It just came off perfectly easy. I just set it at the edge of the table, bending down my mold off of my casting, and it's coming off perfectly. You can sort of feel that little suction from the concrete freshly being cast, and then no problem. So now what we'll do is actually take it out of the mold, and there's still a little bit of moisture in there. And so that moisture right there will go away. It's actually going to evaporate. So that the face of this mold is not going to look like, the face of this casting won't ultimately look like this. It'll actually dry out. So you can see it captured all the detail from our model here. Again, we talked about this being a different model, different mold. I really want, when we get into the next portion of working with the glazes, I really wanted to play with some of this texture on the side here. This took me a lot longer when I was preparing this model to make sure that I had my clay placed in here. If you remember, that was one of the first steps we did when we were building that clay gasket to ensure that no material would get trapped underneath of my model, the original tree model. This took a long time to apply that clay under here. So for the interest of time today and just the size of the model, I chose that different model. But now when it gets to the glazing and the accentuation, this model, I really like the bark, so I'm going to go ahead and use that. So here's where you can get into honing, sanding, different tips when it comes to post-processing. A good tip is to immediately take a 60 grit diamond hand pad and just start to knock off some of this excess material off of here. you're going to get into different types of processing and honing. It really depends, again, on what you're looking for. Do you want an exposed aggregate look? Do you want the cream look, a cream finish? Really, what is the look that you're looking for will dictate how much sanding, how much polishing, and how much honing that you do. Another thing to think about is what sealer are you going to put on it? Some sealers don't like anything processed above 200, sometimes a 400 grit. So if you make this smooth on, it may not accept the sealer that you're ultimately going to apply to this. So, if you have any specific questions about processing, honing, sanding, polishing, definitely reach out to us. We'd be happy to give you more details about that. So what we're going to do today is actually go ahead and start to apply some glazes to these two models. And I actually cast one of these other models yesterday too. One of the other molds, which is just the mold and model we just did today. So I'll go ahead and demold that for us so we can actually have a couple different examples. So here is pretty much what the mold and casting would look like with that mold. So again, there's definitely some details. It picked up the chainsaw marks. It picked up absolutely all of the side bark where all the crazy bugs started to eat away at the bark, and then it subsequently fell off. But you can see, without a doubt, the Vitaflex 40 rubber mold transferred all the detail from our original model into the rubber mold back onto the casting. Okay? So we're now going to segue into the glazing portion. We talked before about integral colors. Integral pigments are something you add to the base of your concrete to give it a different look or a different color. All of our mixes are bone white, and what is the most popular concrete color? Gray. But it's nice to start with a white base because you can go so many different ways. The Buddy Rhodes color wheel, the Buddy Rhodes pigments that we offer the signature and we offer the pure collection, and there's just almost endless results that you can get from those colors. If you have any questions about integral pigments and dosing them, please take a look at the Buddy Rhodes website, the Buddy Rhodes catalog. It'll actually give you a little bit more information about that. Those are integral pigments. The topical pigments are going to be our glazes, and our glazes are effectively a liquid dispersion pigment. So it's got a pigment inside of liquid that allows you to apply it over top of your model and accentuate it. I did a video before on glazes, and I said this is not intended to change necessarily the color of your concrete. It can certainly add and change to it, but it's not intended to be a concrete paint. You don't want to cast something white and then glaze it red. You want to, start with some integral red pigment, and then if you want to pull up any accents with red, you can actually add some red glazes. There are a few other colors in the glaze family. Today I'm just going to be focusing on some umber, some yellow, black, olive, maple, leather, and white, and those are going to give me some of the base tones that I want to use to go ahead and pigment my concrete. So we're going to go ahead and go back to that other model that I had, the model that we just took out of the mold today, the casting. I do have a tendency to mix my terms, so I want to make sure that we realize this is the casting. This is not a real piece of tree here. So applying the glazes can be done in various forms. You can use a nice little sponge, you can use a chip brush, you can use different paint brushes. When you buy them in the small containers, they actually come with a little spritz bottle, a spritz pump. You can spritz them over. I'm a big fan of the chip brush. I just find that it's a little bit easier of a way for me to move the material around. Again, you want to shake them prior to using them, and that's actually going to break up any pigment that may have settled at the bottom. I recommend wearing gloves and glasses when you're working with the pigments. They can stain your clothes as well. Good tip here is to wet the surface of your concrete prior to using it. The glazes are really going to be helped out with a wet surface. And again, all of this is going to change over a day or two, but we'll go ahead and wet this surface out. What I like to do is always keep an extra piece of concrete handy as sort of a palette tester, because what we're going to do is you can mix these, and that's what's nice about these colors. You can mix them. This is where you get more away from that science that we've been teaching, you know, the viscosity, all those terms, the equal part A, the science of it can sort of be taken away, and this is where you get into the art of it. There are absolutely some rules you need to follow when it comes to working with the glazes. Again, it really helps when the base is wet. You can mix them. You can pretty much mix any of these colors to get any type of tone you want. So I like to mix a little bit of leather and maple for my wood tones. So I'll just, again, just mixing a little bit. Me personally, this is where a lot of small scale tests come in. You really want to understand and identify the color you're looking for. Some of my earlier glazes were a little too orange and a little too red, so we want to make sure that it sort of looks like wood. You know, this is absolutely, like I said, this is an art and science type of situation here. Beauty can be in the eye of the beholder. I'm going to take a little bit of olive, and I'm going to take a little bit of umber, and I'm going to use this as my bark on the side, and just to get a little bit of a darker tone. They're liquid dispersion pigments. They're effectively translucent in color until they're going to be translucent. You can see right there, but they're going to retain the color. So you can move them around here. You can see the wetness is absolutely making it a lot easier to move it around here. I'm not painting this. I am moving this glaze around, and I'm allowing it to seep in the porosity of the concrete casting. You don't want to apply it too thick, because then you just start to build up, and then it does look like a paint almost. And so say you don't want yellow, and they actually wipe off very nicely. You can add on top of here. The theory is to sort of let them dry, or let them at least be dry to touch before you start to add any more. But for just today's purposes, we're just going to mix a little bit of my maple leather glaze in there, and you can see now it's starting to pull some of that yellow up from the bottom. I can tell you this right now, there are some absolutely phenomenal artisans out there in the world doing this. I don't claim to be the best glazer in the land. I can hold my own. I can make things look like wood when they need to look like wood. I can make something look like a leaf when it makes it look like a leaf. I can do these neat little antiquing things. I do that a lot when I work with the Buddy Rhodes GFRC, and if I do any planters, I love to accentuate with the glazes, and we've got a lot of planters here, and I did a project last year during the quarantine of applying some glazes to some pavers I had at my house. And I'm a big fan of that antiquing look, and when I say that, what you can do is you can actually take this sponge that I had here. So the sponge is nice because you can actually, if you take the sponge, you can sort of dot it and blot it, and it gives little different techniques. Now this is something you may not want to do for a wood grain technique. You don't want these like different looks on them. You want it to be uniform. You don't want it to be non-uniform. But what's nice is the glazes sort of come right back to life. You just move them around and push them around. You want to allow this glaze to seep into the porosity. I definitely am like a doctor on Friday, no patience, so I really want to just start adding more and adding more. But sometimes you need to walk away from it, let it seep in, and you'll notice that it's going to dry, and it's going to be a little lighter when it dries too with the Buddy Rhodes glazes. The Buddy Rhodes glazes, there are other colors. We have blues and reds and different brighter colors. So if you're looking to do any type of logos or anything like that, you could totally do that. So here's my umber olive mix, and I'm going to actually use a different brush here. Well, I already messed that brush up, but when I come back to my yellows and maples, I'll use a different brush. So you can see I'm just sort of giving it a nice bark look, being very mindful that this material might go right on the top there, like if you have a messy hand like me. No problem, it wipes up pretty easily. The other thing is, you can actually use that as sort of some accentuation in the middle to get those knots to pull out. You can see we have that sort of like that starfish looking knot in there. There's some schools of thought that you could start with your darker tones first, and you could do this border on the outside first and then work on the inside. I, again, am the cleanest person in the concrete shop. I never make a mess. So I know that I won't drip it over top, but it's not a bad idea sometimes if you start with your edges and then you can come back in and do your lighter colors in the middle. If you don't like them, again, they wipe up pretty easily. You can usually just remove that right away. If I don't like that tone and I want to put something, maybe I want to go back to that maple look on top. Maybe I want all my bark to look like that. And then we could actually just put a little bit of that there. And again, moving it around, but I actually don't like that, so we're just going to wipe that up and go back to these darker tones. So on the screen right now, I'm going to ask Alex to show some examples of some glazing that has been done. This is an example of our moderator here, Adam Case, doing a wood form here. He actually has done quite a few projects at his homestead with the glazes, and he can really do a good job of some faux wood, some faux bois. So this is an example of pulling some molds off of some different barn woods and actually applying some glazes here. This next picture is actually a different application. So you see we have used chip brushes, we've used sponges. You can use high density foam rollers if you've got a very large application going on, and you can actually roll that across. This is just a phenomenal piece. You'll see this a lot on social media. Is it wood? What is it? Is it wood or is it concrete? And I can tell you right now, this artisan's name is Steve Millard. He has done some phenomenal glazing. We've worked with him on quite a few projects. He can make pretty much anything look like wood, I can tell you that. He is just a master artist when it comes to these glazes. This next picture is a project that we did with Steve here to make a faux fire table. That is something that was really, really neat that we take to trade shows. And I don't know if anybody remembers those things, trade shows, but I think they're starting to come back to life here. And we take that to trade shows, and it has vapor fire that looks like fire coming out of wood, and it loves to trick everybody's eyes. So it's a super awesome piece. Again, artisan Steve Millard did that, but he's not the only artisan out there that can do this. And it doesn't have to be fake wood or a leaf. You can do a lot of different antiquing and accentuating with these glazes. Some people will say it's like putting lipstick on a pig. If you don't like your casting, if you don't like the way that it looks, you can actually use the glazes to give it a little bit of a different pop or a different look or a different feel. So these glazes have a little bit of a sealer in them, but you're still going to need to seal this casting. So really, depending upon where this casting is going to end up is going to define what type of sealer you have. So again, this glaze has just, it has a little bit of sealer in it, so it's going to protect from some elements. So if I put this in my office or something, it would be fine. But if I put this outside in the elements, we would definitely have an issue over time with the glazes basically coming off and the concrete potentially getting stained from the weather, from sun, heat, rain, which is why concrete always needs to be properly sealed. And that's why I'll ask you to join me next time on my sealing. No, we're going to jump into sealing. That is something I like to do. What we've done today is effectively an abbreviated version of our mold making for concrete class that we do here in Macungie, Pennsylvania. It's Smooth On headquarters. Last year we were prepping for one, unfortunately, when the COVID clamps came down, so we were unable to do any in-person training here, which is why, as with everyone else in the world, we've adapted and overcome, and we're doing these YouTube live presentations. But there is nothing can take away the act of doing this yourself in a live setting. So when we do these Smooth On mold making for concrete training sessions, basically everything that we're covering here today is covered. You get to make your own mold, you get to cast concrete in the mold, you get to work with the glazes, you get to work with sealers. So that's sort of where my joke with the sealers came from. People always ask when the sealers are going to be discussed, and I always say on the 4th day, and they say, but this class is only 3 days, and I say exactly. And the reason being is sealers have a tendency to be known as the Achilles heel of any project. So in the interest of time today, I'm not going to continue to finish glazing this. I think you've got a pretty much an idea of mixing the glazes, adding the glazes. You can cut them with water. There is a little bit of a sealing property in them, but not fully sealed. Wetting the surface is very good. You can wipe that off if you don't like it. Shaking the bottles, application with a chip brush, sponge, the spritz bottle that it comes with. This is really the art side of this project. Again, when we do the mold making for concrete seminar, you can really start to see the people that are the true artists really come out when it comes to these glazing techniques. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to shift this out of the way. Again, in the interest of time, this would take me a few more, I won't say hours, but it's going to take me a few more covers to make sure that this is properly, that the glaze is properly went into the porosity that's in this concrete casting so that it's actually filling it. It's not just filling it on top, becoming like a paint, like I said, a coating. So you really want to come back and do coats and coats. So after a while, this is actually going to lighten up a little bit, and I can come back with some different colors. So what I'm going to do now is move this casting out of the way, and I'm going to bring in one of the other castings that I made yesterday, and we're going to segue nicely into sealing. So as I stated, sealing is known as the Achilles heel of any good concrete project. I said before, you're going to spend all this time working on a proper mold, forming it up, getting everything the way that you want it to look like. You're going to spend time on getting your concrete properly mixed and applied, whether it's pouring, spraying, packing, pressing. And then you're going to follow everything with proper curing, making sure that everything is done properly. And if you choose the wrong sealer, or if you don't properly seal something, unfortunately your project is going to have a tendency to fail. And when I say fail, it could be a stain, it could be what's called blooming underneath the surface where watermarks actually come up. You've got to take into consideration what you're casting, how you processed and cured it, what is the end result? Where is this going? Is it inside? Is it outside? Is it in a commercial setting? Is it a residential setting? Is it pigmented concrete? Is it white? Is it gray? Is it black? Is it a coffee shop? You know what I mean? I don't know how many coffee shops we work with that want white concrete countertops. That's awesome. But you've got to make sure that it's properly sealed. And just with any product or, with any sealer, it may need maintenance. It may need some attention down the line. There is a term that people like to use when it comes to concrete sealers, bomb-proof. There is no sealer that is bomb-proof, that is going to be, that is going to repel everything, oils, Tabasco, cumin, mustard, beer, wine. You'll see these tests that we do, and they're, you've got to identify what you want from the sealer and where this casting is going, who's using it. Is it in a kid's room? Is it in a room that's not used that often? So you may choose a different sealer. So I implore you to go to the Buddy Roads website, take a look at the different sealers that we offer. For this project, we're going to be using the Buddy Roads sealing system, the first two parts of it. The Buddy Roads sealing system is something that we call a simple sealer. This is going to be something that is going to need some maintenance over time. I used this sealer on some pavers that I put in my backyard last year. They're holding up fine. I used the glazes and I used the Buddy Roads satin sealer. I would say maybe by the fall I might end up having to put another coat of the satin sealer on top just to give it a little bit more pop, a little bit more protection. But as of right now, almost a year outside, no issues whatsoever. So the Buddy Roads sealing system is a three-part sealing system. It starts with a penetrating sealer. This penetrating sealer is going to seep into the porosity and protect it from within. The second step to the sealing system is the satin sealer. The satin sealer is more of a topical sealer, giving it a little bit of pop and some topical protection. You'll see I am going back to my safety here. I'm putting on glasses and gloves. Did not need to use a mask for this. There's nothing noxious about this. There are some sealers on the market that are like that you spray on, that you need to wear, full body armor suit, Tyvek suits and things like that. Think about that. If you're putting that on a concrete countertop that people are going to end up, living and breathing and eating on, you want to be mindful of what you're putting on your product, on your end product. So we'll start with a coat of the natural looking Buddy Rhodes penetrating sealer. Again, this is a 3-part system, penetrating, satin, and the third step that I didn't bring today is a optional beeswax. The beeswax is a beeswax puck that you can apply over it as more of a sacrificial coat. This is going outside. I wouldn't recommend using the beeswax puck on an outside application. So, you're fine with just using part 1 and part 2 of the Buddy Rhodes sealing system. We said this is a simple sealer. And when I say it's simple, that means it's simple to apply. It also means it offers limited or simple protection. So you want to be mindful again of where this casting is going and what you're doing with it. So this was a piece that I glazed a few weeks ago. I properly cured it. And what we're going to do is just take a microfiber cloth, and you can put this material into a pump spray bottle and spray it on. I'm just going to simply dip just a little bit into my microfiber cloth, and all we're doing is wiping it around the casting, okay? Making sure that we get a thorough coat over it. As with most sealers, in this case, there's a mantra, thin to win. You don't want to build it up. This is a penetrating sealer. We want it to penetrate any porosity that we have in this concrete. We want it to protect from the inside to the outside of this concrete casting. So again, a few thin coats of this, wringing out our microfiber cloth and just moving it around. That easy. That's how easy it is to apply this sealer. The penetrating sealer. Penetrating sealer, you can typically do a few coats of it, maybe 1 or 2, waiting about an hour in between each coat, before you would then move on to the next stage, which is actually going to be the satin sealer. So typically you can do this in one day. If you do the penetrating sealer applications in the morning, you could come back in the evening and do a satin. I'm a big fan of just, again, taking my time. I'll have a tendency to do I'll do my penetrating on one day and then actually coming back the next day to apply my satin. So I'll go ahead and do the same thing. I'm just going to dispense just a little bit of the satin sealer, giving it a nice little shake. Pouring it into a small container. And you can see this, whereas the penetrating sealer was more of a translucent material, the satin has definitely got a milky white feel to it. So you're going to start to see that. I did use a clean rag. Using a separate clean rag, I used a rag for the penetrating, and I used a new clean rag for the satin. Again, nice thin coats, just applying it on here. And this is going to act as our topical sealer, our topical barrier for when this is put outside into the elements, into the sun, into the rain, into the shade, into Ernie's backyard with my dog, digging holes and going all over them. It is that simple. That's how simple it is to apply the Buddy Rhodes glazes. The Buddy Rhodes sealing system. The glazes, again, do have a slight sealing property in them, but they are not going to offer you the full protection. So I went ahead and I'll do a few coats, an hour in between of the penetrating, following it up with the satin sealer. Okay? Again, this is going to more than likely need some attention down the line, maybe a year or two. But again, maybe you want to choose a different sealer. There are other sealers out there that you can choose that are going to offer a much firmer protection, but you're going to have to get into different curing processes and different honing processes. For this project, this was a nice sealer to work with for decorative outdoor patios, again, pavers, indoor applications like I did with the succulent planters. These succulent planters and candle holders are extremely popular all over the market. So again, this had some Buddy Rhodes glazes and then the penetrating and the satin sealer applied to it. Okay. So that is going to about bring us to the end here today. We've covered a lot in this presentation. I want to thank you for joining. I'm going to go ahead and review a lot of what we've covered today. Again, if you're viewing this presentation at a later date, feel free to go to the Smooth On or the Buddy Roads website, enter in a tech ticket, and we'll be happy to reach out to you. Call the tech line. We'd love to hear from you. All of us in the Buddy Roads team and the Smooth On Concrete team, we're out on the road visiting customers, so we'd love to hear from you. So let's review what we learned today. We started with our ash tree model, and we wanted to make a flat back or a block mold. So we wanted to learn which rubber to choose, and we understood choosing a polyurethane for this project was going to be the best. Also learning how to properly prepare and seal this model. As it was a very porous model, a dry piece of tree, we wanted to make sure that it was properly sealed prior to pouring any urethane rubber over it. We wanted to talk about we talked about the proper techniques. I talked to you about the way that I did it at first, which was building a mold box, and unfortunately wasting a little bit of rubber. So we actually segued to the other portion, making a round mold over our model, and with the aluminum flashing. We also talked about the difference between integral and topical colorants. When we were blending our Buddy Roads concrete, I used integral pigments in the blended mix. That was the sand, the dry pigment that I dispersed in my ice water. And then just a little bit ago, I applied some Buddy Roads glazes topically to my castings. We also learned how to mix the Buddy Roads GFRC. We chose the GFRC because it's the most versatile mix that we have. The bone white base, the high PSI that we can get to build these pavers. We followed the SCC recipe, or the self-consolidating recipe. We actually cut that in half. The recipe was on the screen. If you have any questions about that, don't hesitate to go to the Buddy Roads website. The catalog, the Buddy Roads catalog, has all the recipes that you need inside there. We applied the Buddy Roads glazes. We talked a little bit about the timing of applying them, the way to apply them, making sure that your surface is wet, applying them with either a chip brush, sponge. I admitted that there are other people out there in the world that can apply the glazes better than me. And again, we touched on sealers, and again, sealers are, by no means was I glossing over that, pun intended, with the sealer, but it is, there's a lot that it can be taken into consideration when you're sealing a casting, and you want to be very mindful of that. So to review the products we used Vitaflex 40 to make our flexible rubber mold. That was a 40 durometer. We used Sonite wax as a paste wax to seal our porous tree model. We used Universal Mold Release. It's a silicone-based release agent to create the barrier in between our model and our liquid rubber. We used Aquacon form release when we cast concrete into our polyurethane rubber mold. We used the Buddy Roads GFRC blended mix to cast our pavers today. We accentuated them with the glazes. We added some sand pigment integrally. We used the Buddy Roads penetrating and satin sealer as topical sealers. Within that Buddy Roads blended mix was also PVA 15 and 100 fibers for added reinforcement. And we used water reducer 555 to eliminate the need and the want to add more waters to make sure that we had that good flow for our material. So I really hope that you learned something today. I really want to thank everybody for joining in. It was a lot of fun making flexible rubber molds and then casting Buddy Roads concrete to make these decorative pavers. I really hope you learned something, you enjoyed something. Feel free to add any comments. I'm always looking for some thumbs up, there's no doubt about that. Stay tuned for future Smooth On YouTube live presentations. Make sure you sign up for our mailing list, and if you hit the subscribe button on the YouTube channel, you'll be alerted for those. My name is Erni Doджак from the Smooth On Concrete and Buddy Roads team. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day.